December 22, 1978. The Soviet city of Rostov-on-Don countered a freezing evening with a light skiff of snow. Yelena Zakotnova, a 9-year-old girl, was on her way back home from a skating rink. Standing alone on the railway platform, she waited for the train. A stranger came in from behind and patted her on the shoulder. The man talked to her for a bit and convinced her to walk with him. The innocent Yelena, not knowing what was to come, gave in to the stranger and moved away from the platform. They walked down the road, a road that led to a dark and gruesome end. Andrei Chikatilo was born on the 16th of October 1936 in Yabolchnoi, a village in rural Ukraine within the USSR. Chikatilo grew up in the midst of the Great Ukrainian Famine of the 1930s, during which millions of people died. At the time of his birth, the effects of the famine were still widely felt, which grew worse when the USSR entered the war against Germany. Chikatilo suffered from hydrocephalus at birth, which caused him genital urinary tract problems later in life, including bedwetting into his late adolescence and later the inability to sustain an erection. Although he was able to ejaculate, he shared a bed with his mother, who punished him every time he wet the bed. His home life was disrupted by his father's entry into the war against Germany, where he was captured, held prisoner, and then defamed by his countrymen. Chikatilo suffered the consequences of his father's cowardice, making him the focus of school bullying. Having a tough childhood made Chikatilo shy and have low self-esteem. Due to his deranged relationship with his mother, he wasn't the best when interacting with girls, and his shyness peaked after he found out that he was impotent. After completing his military service, Chikatilo returned to his native village, where he started a relationship with a divorced woman in 1960. The relationship ended due to his inability to get an erection. His friends and peers found out about his impotence, and everyone started whispering behind his back about his impotence, and as a result, he tried to hang himself. He was saved by his mother and neighbors. All of this made him leave the native land and move to Rostov-on-Don. There he became a telephone engineer and got married in 1963. In 1971, he received a degree from Rostov Liberal Arts University and became a teacher. As a teacher, he was largely ineffective, not due to a lack of knowledge, but to his awkward behavior. Andrei Chikatilo committed his first sexual assault in 1973 upon one of his students. He slammed the girl against a wall, and while touching her genital area, he reached climax as she was struggling against his grasp. He was never charged for any incidents, but due to the increasing number of complaints, the school director advised him to resign voluntarily. Andrei then found a job at a new school in Shakhty, a city close to Rostov-on-Don. Chikatilo committed his first documented murder on the 22nd of December 1978 in the city of Shakhty. There he lured the 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova to a house he purchased in secret. He tried to her, but he couldn't get an erection, later choking and stabbing her 3 times in the abdomen. Chikatilo stabbed the child and then proceeded to dump her body in the Grushevka River. She was found 2 days later. Despite the fact that there was evidence linking Chikatilo to the crime, including people giving a description of a man resembling him and bloodstains found near his house. Alexander Kravchenko, a man that served prison time for killing a teenage girl, was arrested for the crime. His teaching career ended following more complaints of child molestation and assault against both sexes in 1981. He then took a job as a supply clerk for a construction company that required him to travel across the Soviet Union. His murder spree continued as he didn't stop his heinous acts over the coming years. He had a pattern of approaching runaways or children in bus stops or train stations, luring them into the forest or secluded areas and stabbing and slashing them to death. He began mutilating his victims with a knife in addition to multiple knife wounds and strangulation. Many of his victims showed evidence of mutilation to the eye sockets after he gouged his victims' eyes out. His adult victims were female prostitutes or homeless women, whereas his child victims were of both sexes. The similarities in the modus operandi and the increasing number of victims forced the Soviet authorities to acknowledge that this was the work of a serial killer. The Soviet police theorized that the person behind these killings must be mentally ill, homosexual, a pedophile, and the like of an individual that spent his time in psychiatric wards. Chikatilo came to the attention of Russian police when he was spotted trying to repeatedly talk to young women at the bus stations, often rubbing himself up against them. Upon delving into his background, they soon discovered his past history and the rumors about his teaching career years earlier. However, a blood type analysis failed to link him to evidence found on the bodies of several victims. Having insufficient evidence to charge him for the murders, he was later charged with the stealing offenses and sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment. After serving just 3 months of his original sentence, he was released. Chikatilo began killing again in August 1985, generally keeping his activities far from the Rostov area. He murdered extensively till 1990. The discovery of more victims led to a massive operation by the police. Major bus and train stations were patrolled by the police force wearing uniforms. Smaller and less busy stations were patrolled by undercover agents. The intention was to discourage the killer from frequenting the larger train and bus stations, where activities would be more likely to be noticed. The operation also involved a large number of young female agents dressed like prostitutes or homeless people. They kept wandering aimlessly in and around stations, as well as traveling extensively along the routes where dead bodies were found. On November 6, 1990, Chikatilo killed and mutilated Sveta Korostik. While leaving the crime scene, he was stopped by an undercover policeman who was patrolling the Lezkhoz train station and saw Chikatilo approaching from the woods. However, Chikatilo was not dressed like a typical forest hiker. He was wearing more formal attire. Moreover, he had a nylon sports bag, which was not suitable for carrying mushrooms. His clothing was dirty, and he had what looked like smeared bloodstains on his cheek and ear. The policeman stopped Chikatilo and checked his papers. Having no formal reason for arrest, Chikatilo was not held. When the policeman came back to his office, he filed a formal routine report, indicating the name of the person he stopped at the train station. Shortly after the encounter, the police found 2 dead bodies 30 feet apart near the train station in Lezkhoz. It was determined that one of the victims was killed around the date of the police report filed about this suspicious man near the Lezkhoz station. It was the second time Chikatilo was indirectly associated with a murder of a child. Police placed Chikatilo under surveillance and saw him continuing to attempt conversations with children and single women at rail stations. On November 20th, they arrested him, and Kostoyev began interrogating him. Although Chikatilo repeatedly denied any involvement in the murders, he did write several essays while in custody that were consistent with the personality profile described by the psychiatrist Bukhanovsky 5 years before. Finally, the police brought Bukhanovsky himself in to talk to Chikatilo. Bukhanovsky read Chikatilo excerpts from the profile, and within 2 hours he had a confession. Over the next few days, Chikatilo would confess in horrifying detail to 34 murders. He later admitted to an additional 22, which investigators had not realized were connected. Chikatilo's trial was the first major event of post-Soviet Russia, as he went to trial on April 14, 1992. Despite his odd and disruptive behavior in court, he was judged fit to stand trial. Relatives of victims shouted threats and insults to Chikatilo, demanding the authorities release him so they could execute him on their own. He was charged with 53 counts of murder and 5 assaults against minors. On the 15th of October 1992, Judge Akubzanov found Chikatilo guilty of 52 of the 53 murders and sentenced him to death for each murder plus 86 years. On the 14th of February 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot behind the right ear and was buried in an unmarked grave at the prison cemetery, ending the horrific and disturbing period in Russian history. The story of Andrei Chikatilo is a dark spot in human psychology. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.